The narrative began with a group of adventurers, the renowned Silver Wing Party, engaged in a fierce battle against a powerful dragon. A fierce warrior, wielding 2 swords, managed to land a blow on the creature's snout, while another adventurer unleashed a bolt of lightning magic from their blade. The dragon countered with a freezing spell, but a human sorceress quickly protected her allies by conjuring a magical shield called Pocher. The barrier, however, shattered under the intense pressure, leaving the adventurers exposed. When the healer was injured, a companion quickly administered a potion, reviving her. Taking advantage of the chaos, a cunning man slashed the dragon's eye, driving the beast into a blind rage. The dual-bladed warrior used her agility to deflect the crackling red beams away from her teammates, and the frontline fighter rallied his allies, reminding them that they were the Silver Wing, the world's strongest party. The scene shifted to an emergency meeting around a round table, crowded with high-level adventurers. VGO, a level 99 leader, immediately pointed the finger at Dennis for their latest failed mission. VGO blamed Dennis for using the voice of dread, which VGO claimed had scared off the cave dragon and cost them the victory. Dennis countered, reminding everyone that it was Captain VGO himself who had ordered him to use the ability, an order the leader promptly denied. Frustrated, Dennis recalled the actual memory of the battle. Their mission had been to defeat the cave dragon and recover its rare materials. When the beast went berserk, winning became impossible. The captain had then demanded Dennis use the voice of dread, and with that burst of intimidation, the cave dragon panicked and ran. Though the mission was a bust, Dennis knew that pressing on would have resulted in heavy casualties. Despite Dennis's recollection, VGO insisted he had never given such an order and accused Dennis of plotting to smear the group's reputation, suggesting he was a spy from a rival team. Based on this unfounded suspicion, the captain condemned Dennis to expulsion. When none of his teammates spoke up, Dennis realized they all agreed with the decision. VGO then sneered that a mere cook like Dennis never deserved to be in the group anyway. Hearing this, Dennis rose from his seat and unleashed a surge of power in front of the leader. VGO remained defiant, stating that Silver Wing was only for the most qualified warriors, and despite Dennis being level 99, he was still just a cook. Accepting his fate, Dennis backed off, accepted his expulsion, and left without another word. A few days later, Dennis was packing up to leave the capital when a little girl bumped into him, accidentally letting go of a balloon, a gift from her mother. Seeing her distress, Dennis swiftly leapt onto a fountain obelisk in the square, retrieved the balloon, and returned it to the overjoyed girl. As she ran back to her mother, Dennis told her, "If something matters to you, don't let it slip away so easily." From a high window, VGO observed his former teammate and decided it was finally time to set his own plan into motion. As Dennis was leaving through the city gates, he was stopped by a former party member, Katie, the dual-bladed warrior. She rushed after him, desperate to understand why he had been kicked out. Katie argued that without Dennis, no one would be able to make the secret potions or cook the delicious food only he knew how to prepare. Dennis shrugged off her concerns, insisting they would find someone better. Katie was adamant, however, stating that the group's dungeon run efficiency had skyrocketed since Dennis joined, which was the real reason Silver Wing sat at the top of the adventurer rankings. She maintained that it was not his fault the others failed to recognize his contributions. If he insisted on leaving for good, she at least wanted him to cook dinner and prep some meals to tide them over. Dennis complained that all Katie thought about was food. However, Katie grew serious and asked what he would do next. He replied that he was opening a restaurant, stating he was finally going to cook for real. Katie was crushed, remembering she had been the one who invited Dennis to join Silver Wing in the first place, but he thanked her for the opportunity. Dennis mused to himself that he and Katie had always gotten along, but he believed VGO was clearly interested in her, and that this rivalry probably influenced his decision to get rid of the cook. As a last-ditch effort, the vice-captain ordered Dennis to return to the team right away, but even without a response, Dennis knew his adventuring days were over. On the bright side, his new life as a chef was just beginning. Without wasting time, Dennis headed to another city and was instantly captivated by a state-of-the-art refrigerator in the marketplace, which he considered an absolute must-have for any real restaurant. He was eager to take it home but first checked his guide for ex-adventurers on opening a restaurant to ensure it was a necessary expense. The book advised that the best approach was to minimize costs wherever possible. This convinced Dennis to skip the purchase for now and rely on his ice magic instead. Leaving the shop, the would-be entrepreneur decided to follow his guide step by step. Getting excited about launching his new business, he circled the marketplace, keeping key tips in mind: buy a cheap abandoned building and renovate it, and build good relationships with suppliers. After a long afternoon of shopping and research, Dennis felt his dream coming alive. Reading a little further in the guide, he realized he should not try to do everything alone, as cooking was crucial, but customers mattered just as much. Therefore, Dennis decided it was time to hire someone. In the middle of his planning, Dennis noticed a man on the street drawing a crowd as he boasted about his hand-picked goods of unparalleled quality. The star attraction was a little girl who, according to the merchant, was once the daughter of a great noble house whose parents had lost a power struggle and been cast out. Some in the crowd wondered if the girl was truly a noble or if it was just the merchant's ploy to drive up her price. Dennis could only think how much he wished he could help her, but he knew he could not save everyone. If he tried to right every injustice in the world, he surely would not survive. Suddenly, the girl met the cook's eyes, and that look transported him back to his own childhood when he wandered the streets alone and abandoned. The auction began with an opening bid of 300,000 pis, which quickly rose to 800,000. Just as the merchant was about to close the deal, Dennis spoke up, offering 1 million. Then, the refrigerator vendor, referred to by others as the octopus, interrupted, raising the bid to 1.5 million. He claimed he was desperate to take the cute little girl home and take good care of her. People around them whispered in concern, noting that the octopus had offered so much for the girl and was known to be depraved, fearing what he would do to an innocent child. Not wanting to give up, Dennis offered 2 million, but the octopus countered with 3 million. The bidding war spiraled higher and higher, seemingly without end. The scene cut, and Dennis had managed to buy the girl, trading away almost every coin he had. Knowing he could not have the girl wandering around in rags, he took her to a shop and bought her a dress that, according to the shopkeeper, matched her hair perfectly. Later that afternoon, the two of them were walking side by side down the street. The girl suddenly stopped in her tracks, standing still for several seconds and ignoring Dennis's calls. Without a word, she started walking again, leaving Dennis at a loss for what to do with her. As she shuffled along with her head down, the girl suddenly looked up and realized she had lost sight of her new master. In a flash, she was nearly run over by a passing cart and bumped into a rough-looking man. Moments later, she did the same to an elderly lady, who snapped at her with open disdain. Each encounter made the child feel trapped in a living nightmare, surrounded by hostile strangers, a helpless creature among wolves. That was when Dennis found her. He confessed how worried he was and apologized for walking too fast. Back at the house Dennis had just purchased, the girl asked why he had bought her. Dennis scratched his head, explaining that she had reminded him of something from long ago. When he asked what he should call her, she replied, "Slave." Not liking that name, Dennis insisted on calling her Aaliyah. He introduced himself with enthusiasm. She then asked what she was supposed to do, and Dennis told her she did not have to do anything. She could use the upstairs however she liked, or she was free to leave if she wished. From that moment on, she was a free person. Later, the cook did what he did best: he prepared a meal fit for his new housemate. While he worked in the kitchen, the girl remained quiet and withdrawn. Besides being a talented cook, Dennis also used a bit of magic to enhance the meal, giving it a special touch. It was this bit of magic that finally made Aaliyah's eyes light up for the first time since she arrived. The aroma was so enchanting she felt like she was floating on air. When she opened her eyes again, a beautiful plate of food sat before her. Dennis sat beside her, and the two of them gave thanks for the meal. The girl took her first bite and instantly fell in love with the flavor, eating as if she could not get enough. Once she was stuffed, Aaliyah suddenly burst into tears. Watching her, Dennis realized he could not imagine what this girl had been through. He decided not to push her with any questions. If she wanted to talk, she would. He resolved that even if she had been hurt so deeply that she thought there was no hope left in the world, at least she would have food to eat there. At one point, Dennis asked if she liked the food, and she realized she had a mountain of rice stuck in her throat, prompting Dennis to come to her rescue once again. Over the next few days, Aaliyah grew used to the rhythms of daily life, helping with cleaning and chores around the house. Before long, she and Dennis were inseparable, sharing every little moment. One day, after finally finishing the restaurant's decor, Dennis celebrated with a fist bump. Aaliyah hesitated, but when she finally returned the gesture, she felt for the first time a sense of belonging and camaraderie with the young man who had done so much for her. At last, the adventurer's restaurant opened its doors, and Dennis wanted Aaliyah to be the poster girl for the place. With everything decided, the owner took one last look around. The menus were ready, the water was out, tables and chairs were set, and the ingredients and kitchen tools were all in their place. Everything was perfect, nothing could stop this venture now. Fired up, Dennis promised himself that the very first customer would fall in love with his cooking so much that they would need to eat there 3 times a day, as long as they paid, of course, because Dennis was dead broke and could not afford to give anyone free meals. Finally, the restaurant door swung open, and a knight in full armor stood silently in the entrance. Recalling page 28 of his guide, Dennis remembered that some customers just wanted to be left alone, preferring not to be bothered. So, even though this person was armed to the teeth, the chef had to keep a friendly distance so as not to make things awkward. As the customer took a seat at the counter, the restaurant owner asked Aaliyah to fetch a glass of water. Dennis, keeping a close eye on the man, waited eagerly to see what he would order, as this was his very first customer, and it had to be special. Instead of speaking, the customer simply pointed to a small portion of rice and a side of crystallized pickled plums on the menu. Honestly, Dennis was a bit let down. He had imagined a warrior like this would go for a hearty meal to recover from some epic battle. Thinking out loud, he asked if the customer was the type to eat like a bird, and the person shook their head. Dennis then asked if they were short on cash, and the warrior's reaction made it clear that was exactly the case. So, Dennis decided to ignore the modest order and whipped up a massive bowl of pretoria, wanting to treat his first customer right. Quickly, the customer made it clear in a distinctly feminine voice that she could not pay for the meal. That was when Dennis realized his customer was actually a woman. At that point, she had nothing left to hide. She took off her helmet and revealed who she really was. She explained somewhat dejectedly that she had been kicked out of her adventuring party just for being a girl, a cruel twist considering gender should not matter when it comes to skill in battle. Her level was respectable enough, probably around 23. Dennis agreed about the gender issue and thought she was mature enough at that level. The adventurer, all fired up, then went on to talk about the vice-captain of the strongest group out there, the Silver Wing, a female swordswoman known as Crimson Lightning, whose opening attack was always a critical hit, clearly a legendary warrior in her own right. Dennis knew all about her, even muttering under his breath that she could be pretty ruthless sometimes, a comment the adventurer did not catch. The adventurer explained that she was hiding her gender to get into another party, but it was tough since she could not even speak without giving herself away. Things had gotten tight, she was running out of money and losing hope. Seeing this, Dennis set down the very first meal for his very first customer. Hoping to lift her spirits, the girl was mesmerized by the dish's mouth-watering appearance. She reminded him she could not pay, but Dennis waved it off, telling her to eat before it got cold. With that, she dug in, and with every bite, she seemed transported. When she finally finished, Dennis, delighted with how happy she looked, invited her to come back anytime. However, as she had already said, she could not afford daily meals at a restaurant. So Dennis made her a promise: he would spread the word that a female swordswoman was looking for a team, and in the meantime, she could eat there for free until she found a job. The generous offer left her speechless. After serving his very first customer, word got out, and more people started coming and falling in love with Dennis's cooking. Whether it was his fried rice or the wyvern pasta he made for a group of men who stopped by, customers praised the food as top-notch and the poster girl as the cutest thing ever. Dennis laughed and told Aaliyah people were praising her, but she just stayed quiet, as if none of it concerned her, a reminder that her past had made her tougher. Even an elderly couple praised her service, but Aaliyah still did not know how to respond. When one of the men in the group remarked that this was the perfect meal before heading off to explore a dungeon, Dennis realized they were adventurers, too. He asked if they would be interested in adding a female swordswoman to their team. One of them replied that she could join them the very next day, as they were actually looking for someone with more firepower. Later that afternoon, when the girl, who would be named Henrietta later, returned to the restaurant, she was amazed that Dennis had found her a new party so quickly. She promised she would pay him back every cent from her first paycheck, even though he had arranged the job for her. Dennis told her to be careful since he did not know those guys, but she was too excited to worry. Soon after, Dennis finished preparing her basilis goiren, and she polished off the plate in no time, vowing, mouth still full, to pay him back for every last bite of that divine meal. Dennis asked her not to talk with her mouth full, so she mumbled, still with her mouth full, how delicious the food was. After her meal, Dennis's first customer left, but she definitely was not the last. As the days went by, more and more people discovered Dennis's restaurant and his uncanny talent for unique dishes. One night, after closing time, with no customers left except for them, two girls stopped by and were just as captivated by the food as he was. Getting ready to close up, Dennis asked Aaliyah to fetch the store curtain for him. Meanwhile, listening in on their conversation, Dennis overheard the blonde girl telling her friend that lately some adventuring groups had been inviting women to join them only to do terrible things to them deep in the dungeons. She explained that they would take the women so far in that they could not find their way back, then abandon them after assaulting them. After pulling this a few times, these adventurers would move on to another city and repeat the cycle. Hearing the blonde girl's story, Dennis wondered if those criminals might have been the guys who had dined at his restaurant. The next day, the heavy-armored swordswoman introduced herself to her new teammates as Henrietta. Her new party consisted of Still, a brown-haired light swordsman who was the technical leader, Marmac, the healer, who wore an earring and a high collar, Handok, the red-haired archer, and Kalatoba, the hooded mage. Since the group lacked an official hierarchy, Henrietta felt she could relax. Soon, the group headed out on their first mission. Still explained that the job would be a simple gathering run inside a dungeon. Henrietta asked what exactly they would be collecting, but the leader vaguely replied that they would discuss it once they arrived and that it was nothing major. Henrietta, while wanting to know the details beforehand, smiled awkwardly and kept quiet, worried about making things weird, until the team finally reached the cave. Once inside, Henrietta quickly proved her exceptional skill, taking down every enemy in a new and creative way. Her teammates watched in awe, clapping and praising the new recruit's performance, words that went straight to her head after the brutal way she had been kicked out of her last group. Still insisted it was time to go even deeper. For the first time, Henrietta felt like people were genuinely counting on her, as she had always been treated as the weak link or the protected one who never really got to fight just because she was a woman. Determined to prove herself, Henrietta swore she would give it everything she had. The party pressed on, delving into the most dangerous parts of the dungeon. Henrietta did not hesitate for a second when a silver golem appeared, meeting it head-on and slicing off one of its arms in a single strike. Next, they faced a massive worm deep within the cave, and Henrietta quickly dispatched it, taking off its head without breaking a sweat. With each new stage, Henrietta grew more determined to prove she was a worthy part of the team. However, all that drive came at a price. After so much fighting, Henrietta was finally exhausted. Even then, her teammates barely seemed to notice, insisting they were almost at their final destination. Left with no choice, she pushed herself onward, not even given a moment to rest her legs. Finally, they reached a certain part of the labyrinth. Still explained that the glowing blue-green crystals scattered around were called memory crystals, and that was what they had come to collect. Henrietta, barely hanging on, nearly collapsed on the spot. The leader told Marmac to cast a healing spell on her. Instead, Marmac cast a spell that restricted her movements even more. Struggling, Henrietta tried to grab her sword, but Still stepped on her hand and kicked the weapon away. With her body reeling from the stun effect, Henrietta was easy prey for the gang of criminals. Planting his foot on her, the team leader mocked how easy she had been to fool with just a bit of sweet talk. According to him, swordswomen were always the best targets, they were not as clever as mags or sages, and they usually had the nicest bodies. The plan, he said, was to have their fun with the pretty one for an hour and then let her go. Marmac even admitted he was going to stun her again afterward, but suggested that if she gave in, maybe she would make it out of this. Hearing all this, Henrietta could only regret not listening to Dennis, believing that if she had just paid more attention, she would have known something was wrong from the start. With that, the criminals started removing her armor. Suddenly, the sound of battle echoed through the cave, causing the criminals to panic, worried that another party was nearby. Still told Handok to check it out, but the leader was immediately knocked aside by a blow that sent him flying. The source of the chaos stepped forward, wearing a bag over their head and wielding 2 kitchen knives. The sheer fury of the intruder made the adventurers think a monster had come for them. Still quickly ordered Marmac to use a detection spell to find the intruder's weakness, but the spell was useless against such a terrifying opponent. In a flash, the stranger attacked still, and even though he blocked with his sword, he was hurled against the cave wall with bone-crushing force. As Henrietta lay helpless on the cold dungeon floor, the masked figure absolutely wrecked the criminals. Watching through blurry eyes, Henrietta thought the person moved just like a master chef, but she passed out before she could make sense of it all. The next scene showed Henrietta recounting what had happened the day before, as night fell. When she had woken up, she was lying in the Adventurers Guild waiting room. She was told she had been unable to thank the mysterious, muscular man with the kitchen knives, whose identity was unknown. Her attackers had been knocked out, tied up, and left at the dungeon's entrance. When the guild investigated, it turned out they were wanted criminals. After all she had been through, it almost felt like a bad dream. Still, it was clear to Henrietta that she needed to be much more careful about who she adventured with from now on. To her surprise, Dennis said it was his fault too, explaining that he should have done some background checks on those guys. Embarrassed, Henrietta insisted it was not his fault, until her stomach let out a loud growl. Dennis asked what she wanted for dinner. She remembered she was still broke, but as always, the chef did not care, he just wanted to see his partner with a full belly. Henrietta then asked for the supreme Hargene steak combo. Dennis joked that it was the most expensive dish, and when she realized she had overstepped, she tried to order the cheapest one instead. The chef laughed it off and told Aaliyah to close up for the night, announcing that since their guest had ordered the biggest meal, the two of them were going to have to eat it together. Just then, the 2 girls from the other day returned and ordered a palama lasagna and a baked palama. A little while later, Dennis finished Henrietta's supreme Hargene steak and brought another portion to Aaliyah, who was just as floored by the dish's sheer beauty and juiciness. The other customers asked why the chef had not been open yesterday, so he explained he had a few things to take care of. Hearing this, Henrietta started to get suspicious, picturing that same bag from the day before over Dennis's head, which fit just a little too perfectly. Right after, someone opened the restaurant door, and with a smile, Chef Dennis welcomed the newest customer to the Adventurers restaurant. The next day, back inside the restaurant, Henrietta tried to get the owner's attention for a chat, but he was so caught up in his work that he practically cut her off just to ask what she would have today. After a few seconds of thought, the knight ordered the sorcerer's ramen. Only after she placed her order did Dennis show that he had actually been listening. Henrietta wanted to know if she should go back to hiding her gender for future adventures. The cook told her she should do things her own way because that was the only way she would ever truly be herself. Hearing those words, Henrietta hurried to the back of the restaurant to take off all her armor. Before coming back out, she reflected that when people made mistakes, they started to fear making new ones and sometimes lost sight of who they really were. Instead of giving in to that fear, the girl stepped out in her true outfit, allowing herself to show her real self. Seeing this, Aaliyah gave her look a thumbs up, and Dennis smiled in approval. Meanwhile, someone approached the restaurant door. Inside, the warrior enjoyed every bite of her noodles, her happiness plain to see, as Dennis's advice had truly touched her heart. Words from a skilled chef, she felt, just hit different. Speaking of which, Dennis suddenly changed his tone. Since she had managed to eat everything in sight, he wanted to know if she was planning to join another group and get back to work. Henrietta tried to dodge the question, so the chef got more direct, pressing her about the tab she owed him. Right then, a very young person walked in, took a seat at the counter, and opened the menu, pausing Dennis's back and forth with Henrietta for a moment. The owner greeted the newcomer, though he had no idea if they were a boy, a girl, or maybe both. For her part, Henrietta could only think about how beautiful the child was. Avoiding any pronouns, Dennis asked to be notified when the customer was ready to order, and the kid asked, "What's good to eat?" "Everything," Dennis replied, but the child thought that was about the most useless answer possible. Unfazed, the chef suggested a richer katsun, but the kid was not in the mood for a rice bowl. Henrietta suggested pasta instead, something like a spa katsu, but the child thought that sounded too heavy. The warrior tried offering something else, but the kid was as picky as could be. Dennis lost his patience and nearly snapped at the customer, forcing Henrietta to hold him back. Aaliyah, meanwhile, nudged the kid and said fried rice was the way to go in situations like this. With the choice made, Dennis set to work with his usual cheerful flair, whipping up a meal with his signature magical touches. Soon enough, he served up a gorgeous plate of pancake fried rice. Without hesitation, the kid grabbed a shrimp from the top and instantly fell in love with the taste. Afterward, Dennis asked if there was something the kid wanted to talk about, as they had walked in looking like someone who needed to vent. Since he brought it up, the kid confided that everyone around them was just hopeless and mentally stunted, only ever thinking about finishing whatever quest was at hand and collecting a handout for payment, with zero ambition to become a top-tier group. That, the kid confessed, was what they could not stand most, those losers just pretending to be adventurers for show, which was unforgivable. The problem was that when the kid spoke this truth to their old group, they got kicked out, but that was exactly what they had wanted. There was no way they could stay in a team of such shallow-minded people. Instead, they announced that one day they would join the Silver Wing and become the greatest magic user there was. Not really in the mood for this conversation, Dennis told the egotistical kid to dial it back a little, or else risk ending up alone, because what made a real adventurer was the group, not just individual talent. The mage agreed, as long as the group was strong enough to keep up. Lunch finished, the kid paid for the meal and said they would leave the change, even though they had already paid the exact amount. Before leaving, they introduced themselves as Vivia Strange, making it clear they would return for more of that shrimp fried rice. Sure enough, the next day, Vivia was back, waiting as the chef fried up shrimp for lunch. This time, Vivia shared that they had decided to join the area's strongest group, the Nightmist Troop. After all, when someone was as strong as Vivia, they ended up being pretty populous. Dennis corrected them, saying popular was the word they meant, and asked if the team was really up to Vivia's level. Vivia was unsure but trusted in their own skills and was certain they just needed the chance to show what they could do. Dennis noted that the kid really had some spirit. Vivia eagerly looked forward to the day they would finally join the Silver Wing. Soon, the meal was served, and once again enchanted by the food, the short little mage wondered aloud if they would get a cool nickname when they joined the Silver Wing, something like the Dark Mage or similar. Dennis thought to himself that it was more likely they would call this little guy Fried Rice Boy, but even if Vivia was egocentric, the chef admired their drive to get better, believing that as long as the kid found a reliable team to grow alongside, someday they would make a trustworthy adventurer. Dennis asked when their first job with the new team would be, and Vivia explained that tomorrow they would be gathering rare synthesis materials on the 5th floor of the dungeon. A bit concerned, Dennis used his scan ability and found out Vivia was level 17, which was really high for someone that age, but the recommended level for entering the 5th floor was at least 30. With that in mind, Dennis asked if that was not a bit deep for them. But Vivia was sure it would all work out, especially since the elite members would be supporting them. Hearing this, Dennis thought the kid had probably read about advanced spells and now believed they could pull them off in a real battle. According to the chef, a person's level was basically a measure of the number and quality of the skills they had acquired. The reason someone's base stats went up every time they leveled up was because the skills they already had became sharper and were almost always active. So, if Vivia really had mastered several advanced skills, it was strange that their level had not increased accordingly. With that in mind, Dennis tried to get the mage to see their own limits. But Vivia insisted the chef could never understand what it was like to enter a dungeon, a feeling only adventurers got. Dennis, however, remembered all too well the last time he made it to the 37th floor. Either way, Vivia paid for their lunch and told Dennis everything was going to be fine. They also warned ahead of time that next time they were ordering crab fried rice. The next day, as Dennis was walking through the street market with Aaliyah, he could not help but worry about Vivia, who was probably on the 5th floor of the dungeon right now. Dennis wanted to stop the kid, but he knew that in the world of adventurers, people had to take responsibility for themselves, as that was just how it worked. Aaliyah tugged at his sleeve and said, "I hope he's okay." Suddenly, two adventurers walking by started talking. One asked if that kid, Vivia, was going to be all right. The other shrugged it off, saying that was just how they did things, and there was no point worrying at this stage, even though Captain Hopper had sent the kid down to the 5th floor by himself just to see if he would survive, calling it a rite of passage where most people ended up dead. Hearing that, Dennis grabbed both guys and dragged them into a secluded alley to get some answers. Thinking they were hot shots because they were members of the Nightmist Troop, the two men went on the attack, but Dennis beat the hell out of them without breaking a sweat. They did not even come close to landing a hit. Dennis headed back to Aaliyah and sighed that they would have to close the restaurant again today. Understanding the situation, the girl looked him in the eye and wished him luck. As for Vivia, they were learning the hard way that real life was nothing like what they had read in their magic books. They were running for their life, trying to shake off the monsters chasing them. Earlier, those two adventurers had left them alone as a test to see if they could join their group. Along the way, a vine suddenly sprang to life and wrapped around their ankle, stopping them in their tracks. Terrified, Vivia tried to remember the spell to break enchantments, but they were so scared that their mind just went blank. For all the spells Vivia had memorized, the young mage found themselves utterly helpless, just waiting for the goblins to catch up and finish them off. Caught in their panic, a magical chain slowly passed right through Vivia. Moments later, the goblins reached where Vivia was tied up, but the young mage was already gone. In fact, a girl had hidden them in a hole in the wall, letting them escape the monsters that were after them. Vivia thanked her for the rescue and was genuinely amazed that she knew a spell as ancient as dispelling magic. Even so, the girl, whose name was Cynthia, made it clear that now was not the time to feel safe, they still needed to find a way out. Sadly, she, too, had been abandoned by her group after falling into a trap while running from monsters. No matter what she did, Cynthia had always felt like she was not even good enough for the basics, always causing problems for her teammates. Taking a chance, Vivia admitted that they would not be rescued either, and perhaps they had been a little too full of themselves, confessing that no matter what group they were in, they always stirred up trouble because of their terrible personality. The two found comfort in their similar situations, and just like that, a bond formed between them. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, Aaliyah was sweeping the sidewalk. Back in the dungeon, the goblins seemed to be coming back, making their usual ruckus. Faced with danger, Vivia came up with a plan. He decided to act as bait and draw the creatures away, giving Cynthia a shot at escaping. Cynthia vehemently disagreed, saying it made no sense for him to sacrifice himself. But Vivia insisted that he would not even be alive if it were not for her. For the first time in his life, Vivia Strange was ready to die for someone else. He admitted he had spent his whole life being selfish, looking down on others, and thinking he was better than everyone, but Cynthia had saved and comforted him. Now, with all his heart, he just wanted her to get out of this alive. Cynthia pleaded with him to wait for help, but Vivia had already made up his mind to sacrifice himself to save her. The young mage gathered his courage and strength, stepping out of the hole in the wall to face the goblins, determined to give it everything he had so Cynthia had a chance. As the monsters got closer, the mage cast his spell, Palm, which literally conjured a giant hand that acted as a barrier to hold back the enemies. But the goblins managed to force their way through after some effort and finally closed in on him. Then, quite literally, Dennis came crashing down on the goblins. He did not arrive with a weapon, but with a gigantic pan he conjured with a spell actually called Steel. With this huge pan, he managed to split the corridor, separating the creatures on the other side. Thinking it was another monster with a bag over its head, Vivia started firing off a bunch of palms. When he heard the monster's voice, however, he realized it was just the chef. Dennis pulled off the bag, smacked Vivia on the head for doing something so reckless, and told him it was time to leave. Vivia dashed off to find the friend he had made in the dungeon, but when they got to the hole in the wall, they discovered that Cynthia was actually just a skeleton wearing the girl's clothes all along. The next day at the Adventurers Guild, Vivia and Dennis looked into the origins of that girl and discovered her name was Cynthia Dread, a 16-year-old mage who had gotten separated from her party on the 5th floor of the dungeon 13 years ago. Because of this discovery, they visited the adventurer's grave late in the afternoon to pay their respects. Dennis mentioned he had heard stories like this before, where the spirits of adventurers who died in labyrinths sometimes helped people who got trapped there. As they placed flowers on the tombstone, Vivia broke down in tears and promised he would always come back to visit his friend and that he would become the world's #1 mage to save people like Cynthia. As they were leaving the cemetery, Dennis tried to cheer him up, promising to make him a big plate of fried rice. But Vivia was still visibly shaken by everything that had happened. So, the chef gave him a hearty slap on the back and told him not to stay down for too long, or Cynthia's spirit would never be free. Annoyed, Vivia said he knew that already, but just wanted to let himself be sad, at least for a little while. Suddenly, he felt the girl's magical current flow through him once again. Vivia thought to himself that in the old days, whenever people experienced something mysterious, they called it magic, and if that was true, then Cynthia Dread was certainly a mage. Meanwhile, at the city's bell tower, a girl stood at the edge about to fall, wondering why things had to end up like this. Later that afternoon, a man called out to the girl, Buckle BL, demanding to know when she would finally fix the report she was supposed to turn in. Head down, the little girl just muttered an apology, but that was not enough for him. The other guys in the room just laughed and made fun of her. When Buckle tried to explain that the numbers for the mission reward payouts did not add up, her boss smacked her on the head with a stack of papers and told her she had better redo everything until it matched up, doubting that she was really level 32 at all. Because of that scolding, Buckle was stuck at work long after everyone else had left. While trying to straighten things out, she noticed that the number of collected items was off, which was why the reward calculations did not match up. In her mind, it had to be someone who had been there longer than her making these mistakes, but she was still the one stuck fixing them. On top of all that, she had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a dawn mission, and she had not had a bite to eat all day, neither lunch nor dinner. She was absolutely starving. Even though she doubted any restaurants would still be open, her hunger was so intense that she decided to take a chance and check if a new place she had heard about might still be serving. When she got there, Aaliyah was just packing things up to close, and for a second, Buckle felt her hopes sink. But then Aaliyah asked if she was a customer, giving the girl a chance to slip in at the last minute. Not only that, but the staff member asked Dennis to take care of just one more order for the night. Dennis was not thrilled about it, but Henrietta and Vivia chimed in too, convincing the chef to whip something up for the girl. Embarrassed, Buckle sat at the counter and, after glancing at the menu, ordered the daily special. While Vivia chatted to Henrietta about cutting her bangs, Buckle found herself soaking in the cozy atmosphere, which made her heart feel lighter. The truth was, she usually spent her rare days off sleeping with no friends to hang out with, and she realized it would be nice to come to a warm place like this more often. After a while, Dennis brought out the special, and the new customer stared at the fried food and the unfamiliar sauce. She had never seen anything like it. The moment she tasted it, Buckle was blown away by what the chef could do. She confessed that she had never eaten anything so delicious in her entire life, agreeing that this place was a total gem. Henrietta rattled off another 15 dishes for her to try, like Vitra's katsudon or the magic ramen. Vivia joked that his friend had already tried everything in this dump. Henrietta replied that, well, what else do you expect from the restaurant's first customer? First freeloader, you mean? Chef Dennis shot back, I let you run a tab, and you took full advantage. Time to get a job already. Henrietta grumbled, but Vivia was unemployed, too. The chef pointed out that the mage at least paid for his meals with his savings, earning himself the title of traitor from Henrietta. At that, Buckle burst out laughing so hard she started to cry, and everyone turned to look at her. She realized there really was a place in the world filled with good food and good people. But every day she was stuck at a job where everyone hated her for no reason, and she had to work late into the night. Honestly, Buckle woke up every morning wishing she could just disappear. Though it had not always been that way, when she was younger, people saw her as a promising mage, praised by everyone in her community. She was so talented that when she came of age, the whole village pooled their resources to sponsor her studies in the big city, hoping she would become a full-fledged sorceress. Things started off well enough right away. Buckle skipped ahead a grade because of her remarkable abilities, and she was even offered a spot as a faculty member, a teacher. She brimmed with confidence and planned to join the city's strongest adventurer guild to earn money and give back to those who had supported her. With that memory lingering in her mind, Buckle left the restaurant after only a single bite of her food. Everyone inside worried about her, and Vivia mentioned she was part of the Nightmist Troop, the same group that had once left him for dead. The others quickly urged Dennis to do something, but the chef just shrugged, saying he was only a cook, all he could do was feed people. Buckle, it seemed, would have to help herself. At 3 o'clock in the morning, her alarm went off. It was time to get ready for her mission, though she had not managed to sleep at all. Exhausted, she dozed off for just a moment and ended up running late. In a rush, she grabbed her things and hurried down to meet her teammates, who were furious about her lack of responsibility. Still, they set out for their morning dungeon mission. In the chaos, they were ambushed by a werewolf that knocked one of the team members to the ground. Buckle reacted instantly with a blast, taking down the monster. Worried, she rushed to check on her injured teammate, only to be shoved aside by the very man she had just saved. After the mission, the young mage wandered through the city streets, weighed down by sadness. Her teammates had had the nerve to blame her for what happened to the guy in the dungeon, and they had said awful things to her, telling her they would all be better off if she was not around. Nearby, Henrietta and Vivia were walking down the street talking about food. Henrietta rattled off every single dish on Chef Dennis's menu while Vivia suggested she focus on more pressing things like getting a job. That was when they spotted Buckle, head down, as she walked by. The next scene found Buckle at the top of the bell tower, standing at the edge and wondering how her life had come to this. Vivia and Henrietta had followed her, realizing things were much worse than they had thought. Just as the bell began to ring, Buckle jumped. Henrietta leaped after her, grabbing hold of the girl, while Vivia cast a cushioning spell near the ground, turning their fall into a soft landing. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Aaliyah stepped out of the bath and immediately complained there were no towels, which, of course, meant she walked out dripping wet and stark naked, leaving Dennis scrambling, desperate to find something, anything, for the little girl to dry herself off with. Moments later, Vivia and Henrietta showed up with Buckle in tow. The cook took one look at the situation and concluded that the little mage was dealing with an illness of the mind. The more serious it was, the more people kept their troubles to themselves and ended up destroying themselves. Vivia could not help but jab that Henrietta would never suffer from anything like that. When he saw the girl actually laugh, Dennis realized just how well those two troublemakers were already getting along. Henrietta wanted to know how Buckle could be cured, and the chef explained the only real remedy was plenty of rest. Vivia was not convinced that would ever happen, as Buckle was part of the Nightmist squad, so Dennis promised to have a talk with the crew. That night, he welcomed the squad's members into his restaurant. Their leader, Captain Hopper, was quick to apologize that one of his team was giving Dennis so much trouble. Dennis, for his part, insisted he was the one who should be apologizing, since he had knocked a few of them out at one point. Hopper brushed it off, saying he had heard the food here was supposed to be top-notch. Dennis could tell this guy was not giving him an inch, and his skills quickly sized him up, level 51, way out of the league of any average adventurer. No wonder his squad was number one in the city. As for Buckle, Dennis explained she was safe and resting for now, but she was in no condition to work with the Nightmist and should really be released from the group so she could recover. Hopper said that was easier said than done, as they had custody of the girl after all. At that, another member tossed Buckle's contract onto the table. Dennis was furious when he saw what she had signed up for: impossible conditions and an inhuman workload, especially for someone her age. When the others mocked his concern, the chef lost his cool and told them flat out they were nothing but a gang of cruel con artists. Hearing that, Hopper crushed his mug in his hand and said, "This city is their turf. They're the law around here." If Dennis did not want any trouble, he had better hand Buckle over. At the same time, Buckle woke up feeling miserable, wondering why her friends would not just let her die. Already, someone like her would be better off dead. Hearing this, Alia calmly told her she was free to die if that was what she wanted. Alia herself had thought about ending her life once. She had lost, she had been banished and sold as a slave, and that was when the dark thoughts started. There was nothing good in her mind back then, just pain and suffering. But Alia did not die because somehow there were still wonderful things in life. First things first, she told her friend, have something delicious to eat and only then decide what you really want. If Buckle still wanted to die after that, then maybe there was nothing else to be done. Either way, Alia would respect her choice, though she would much rather Buckle choose to live. Outside the room, Dennis asked Hopper if he thought he was king or something. Hopper shrugged, saying it was pretty much like that. In every dungeon city, the strongest group held the real power since nobody else could compete. Silverwing was a perfect example. Dennis pointed out that Hopper's bunch were nothing like them, but Hopper disagreed, saying it was basically the same thing, except instead of royalty and nobles as clients, Nightmist's influence was limited to this little city. Honestly, he thought this dump was so run down it ought to be burned to the ground. Suddenly, Katie, the Crimson Lightning, burst into the restaurant, never mind that it was closed. Dennis's old teammate was thrilled to see him after so long and complimented the down-to-earth vibe of his place. Dennis tried to get her to come back later since he was in the middle of something important, but Katie pouted, saying she had come all the way from the Oak House just to see him, and this was the welcome she got. Hopper could not help but notice the crimson armor, the twin red swords, and her fiery hair, not to mention the insignia on her coat. That was when it clicked, he was looking at the vice-captain of Silverwing, better known as the Crimson Swiftblade. Right then, Hopper started getting seriously nervous about how close Katie and Dennis seemed. After Dennis convinced Katie to wait a bit, he asked if there was a way to get Buckle out of the squad without causing a scene. Katie immediately interrupted again, scooping Vivia up for a hug like a little stuffed animal. Dennis had to remind her that Vivia was a guy. While the young mage asked how she knew the chef, Katie cheerfully revealed Dennis used to be part of Silverwing and that the two of them were basically partners, a revelation that hit the entire restaurant like a bombshell, leaving everyone stunned. Hopper's eyes went wide when he realized where Dennis came from. He finally understood that making an enemy out of this guy was a terrible idea. On that note, he ordered a subordinate to burn Buckle's contract, officially releasing her from the squad, then stormed out of the place, fuming. Katie remarked that things could have gotten ugly, and Dennis was relieved it all ended without a fight. Katie, on the other hand, was furious that anyone would mess with her Dennis, but he could not even remember ever being part of Crimson Lightning. Brimming with anger, she asked if he wanted her to kick that jerk out of town, and Dennis knew she had the power to do it, but told her to cool it. Katie grumbled that Dennis could be a real pain sometimes, but honestly, she kind of liked that about him. Putting all that aside, the chef asked his old friend what she wanted to eat. Just then, Alia showed up to order the daily special for Buckle, who was finally out of bed. Dennis smiled as Alia pulled out a chair for the sick girl, and Katie ordered the same dish for herself. Once the food was ready, both of them got their meals and could finally dig in. Katie dove right in, showing Buckle that eating could actually be a lifesaver. Then, after Dennis reminded her that she was still there, the girl snapped out of it and tried the house's signature fried shrimp with the special sauce. Her reaction was as if she had died and gone to heaven, only to come back after tasting something that incredible. From that moment on, she just could not stop eating, savoring every bite with pure delight. After her trip back, Katie arrived at the Silverwing base, where her teammates were murmuring about Captain VGO's foul mood and how the squad's missions had been going downhill lately. Lost in thought, she accidentally bumped right into the captain himself. VGO shot a glance at the gossiping pair and ordered them out to the day's mission. He then turned to Katie, mentioning that he had heard she went to see Dennis. Katie explained she had been missing her friend's cooking. After all, there were few things in this world she enjoyed more than one of his meals. Actually, maybe it was nostalgia, but when she tasted last night's dish, she was so happy she invited the chef to come back to Silverwing. She went on, explaining that the whole group had been teetering on collapse since Dennis left, but he was not interested and had no intention of coming back. Katie stated that Dennis was the backbone of the squad support team, and now that he was gone, the members who relied on him were getting more and more irritated with VGO, who had done nothing to fill the gap. Dennis stood his ground. Dennis made it clear that this was his life now. He stated that while his customers might be a bit unhinged, he was happy. He liked this restaurant and was not planning on returning to that stressful team anytime soon, reasserting that he was a cook, not an adventurer. VGO, in turn, also made it clear that he did not want Dennis back on the team. In fact, he ordered Katie to stay away from him altogether. Upset, she could not understand how things had gotten to this point, but the captain would not say another word and shut down the conversation then and there. Meanwhile, Dennis's restaurant was absolutely packed, with customers crowding in and putting his cooking speed to the test. He had to whip up magic-infused ramen and pancake hajin yakisoba for everyone. At the same time, Alia proved she was not slacking off, jotting down every order while dashing back and forth. Vivia commented that the restaurant was finally thriving, and Henrietta agreed it was hard to resist the chef's food. Suddenly, the mage was served by Buckle and was surprised to see her working there. Buckle explained that from now on, she was going to live and help out at the restaurant, and she was grateful to her friends for always stopping by when she was not feeling well. Vivia was happy for her but pointed out that she should not push herself so hard. Embarrassed, Buckle admitted she only felt at ease when she was working. Besides, her mini-wise companion Alia was always by her side, come what may. Dennis showed up and said the two of them made a great team, which Henrietta wholeheartedly agreed with. Anyway, that was not the only reason he was there. He was there to serve his most loyal customers and dear friend some of his shrimp dishes. As soon as they took a bite, their reaction was exactly what one would expect. They worshipped those shrimp like they were gods. Henrietta understood perfectly why the restaurant was so packed and was even proud to be a regular. Dennis corrected her, stating she was not a regular but a freeloader, killing her scammy vibe on the spot. Vivia was shocked to realize his friend still had not paid the chef back. She tried every excuse, explaining how hard it had been to find a job in this economy. Either way, the chef shot her a menacing look and made it clear that if she kept dodging her bill, things were going to get heated. Vivia tried to change the subject by pointing out how many customers there were and asking if it was tough to serve everyone at once. Dennis praised Alia for keeping everything running smoothly, so Vivia figured the little one must be having fun. Buckle in turn asked if something good had happened to her friend, since she was so upbeat. Right then, Dennis froze and dropped a bowl on the floor. He asked if Vivia could come by the restaurant on his next day off, as he needed some advice. Henrietta jumped in, offering her own advice if the chef needed it, but he shot her down immediately. Still not sure what was going on, Vivia agreed to the invitation. On the other hand, Henrietta had not just been shut out by that invitation, life itself had kicked her down. Out of work and flat broke, she did not even have hot water at home. She missed the public baths where at least she did not have to freeze under a cold shower. The problem was she did not have money for a bath there either, as she needed to pay the chef first. Speaking of which, totally anxious about whatever Dennis and Vivia were going to talk about on his day off, Henrietta was convinced they would be plotting how to ban her from the restaurant. She was determined to do something to stop that from happening. Fast forward to the day off. Vivia headed to the restaurant and heard from Dennis that Alia seemed to have a boyfriend. Completely frazzled, Dennis explained he had started giving her an allowance recently, and after that, she had been going out all the time. He just could not handle the thought that she might be involved with some random guy. To make matters worse, Dennis confided in a panic that he had seen her with a boy and was now pounding the table, demanding to know if that kid was his adopted daughter's boyfriend. Vivia tried to calm him down, suggesting he just ask her instead of overthinking. But the truth was, Dennis could not bring himself to broach the subject. Dennis declared that if the boy really was her boyfriend, the least he could do was show up and gift the father-in-law with a box of sweets or something. Since he did not, that proved he was weak and shallow. And if that was the case, Dennis would not stand for it. He would only accept the guy if he was over level 80. Just then, Alia popped in, asking what they were talking about, and Dennis nearly fell over from panic. Vivia, showing a bit more maturity, tried to play it off, saying they were just chatting about cooking. The little girl piped up that she wanted to learn, too. To keep the act going, Dennis told her to wash her hands and get ready to start learning. Once that was done, he brought both of them over to the counter to teach them the right way to cut onion so the flavor of Ritra's katsudon would really stand out. Their eyes started to sting from the onion's bite. Even though Vivia was complaining, too, the chef's attention was entirely on Aaliyah, who could not help but feel left out. Watching Aaliyah work, Dennis remembered the day he first learned to cut onions from his mom. That day, she noticed he was secretly using a skill to keep his eyes from burning. He asked how she could tell, and she just smiled and said, "No matter what you do, I always know." Lost in the memory, Dennis snapped back to reality to find Aaliyah had dropped eggshells into the bowl. He jumped in to help with the cooking, joining Aaliyah and Vivia. The three of them shared a rare moment of teamwork and learning, the kind of scene one would expect from a real family. When everyone's dishes were finally ready, Dennis praised Aaliyah for her first attempt, telling her it was impressive for a beginner. On the other side, Vivia held his plate up like a trophy and bragged about his own skills, only to get annoyed when he realized the chef only had eyes for his fake daughter. Right then, the city bell rang, and without missing a beat, Aaliyah slipped out of the restaurant, saying she was going for a walk but dodging any specific questions about where she was headed. Just then, Buckle woke up, so Dennis told her to eat the 2 katsudon that were ready. Vivia reminded everyone that one of them was his, but Dennis cut him off and handed Buckle the shopping list instead. Looking confused, she asked if Dennis was not going with her, but he explained that he and Vivia had a little something to take care of right now. Next, Henrietta burst into the restaurant to announce she had passed a test to join an adventurer group, but the chef interrupted her mid-sentence and asked if she would like to go shopping with Buckle today. Eager to prove she could be useful, she said yes on the spot. And with that, Dennis bolted out the door, dragging Vivia along with him. Out at the street market, the chef and the mage spotted Aaliyah saying goodbye to an old lady. Vivia grumbled that they should not be stalking the girl like this, but Dennis shrugged it off. After all, he was her protector. If that was the case, Vivia asked why he did not just go talk to his daughter. Dennis admitted he could not bring himself to do it, so the mage declared he was basically a stalker at this point. Ignoring the young wizard's words, the level 99 chef turned the kid's head towards Aaliyah and pointed out the last thing he wanted to see, his adopted daughter chatting it up with some boy at a market stall. Dennis was practically about to explode. Vivia pointed out that he did not even know if that kid was her boyfriend, and that it was important for her to have friends, too. Still tuning his friend out, Dennis kept a close eye as Aaliyah was led by the boy into a jewelry store. Now Dennis was really freaking out, he was convinced she was about to buy a wedding ring. Amid the chaos brewing in his mind, Vivia came up with an idea. After their errands, Buckle noticed her friend looked worried and asked if she was okay. Henrietta confessed she could not stop thinking about her debt to the chef. Buckle did not get why the adventurer could not save any money, considering the missions paid well. Henrietta explained that besides equipment upkeep, she was always getting herself hurt and blowing cash on potions just to recover. As strange as it sounded, Henrietta felt like the more she worked, the less money she had. Now that money was tight, she really wanted to find some way to repay Dennis for everything he had done for her, but she just did not know how. Buckle, for her part, praised her friend's character for caring so much and was rewarded with a heartfelt hug. At that moment, the girls overheard 2 men gossiping about the captain of the Nightmist Troop. Apparently, the guy got humiliated by a restaurant manager who, as it turned out, was rumored to be a former Silver Wing. In the end, the 2 hoped the Nightmist Troop did not come looking for revenge against the chef. Hearing this, Buckle and Henrietta exchanged a tense glance. Meanwhile, Vivia borrowed a megaphone from a nearby shop. But it was not just any megaphone, it was a magical item used for speeches and plays. Imbued with wind magic, it let voices carry over a distance. With this in hand, the duo managed to sneak close to a jewelry store window to eavesdrop on what Aaliyah was saying inside. The first thing they heard her say was, "It's beautiful. I love it. A treasure for life. Aaliyah is so happy to have met you." Naturally, Dennis completely lost his mind hearing that and had a meltdown right there in the street. Meanwhile, a woman's purse was stolen by a thief using wind magic. So, Dennis quickly pulled himself together to see what had happened to the victim. The thief was gloating about how easily he had taken the old lady's money, but he was not prepared for a man sprinting toward him at full speed with a child slung over his shoulder. Feeling pretty confident, the thief was level 30 and figured that was more than enough to shake off this nuisance. But he quickly realized he was in trouble when he saw his pursuer was keeping up without even using magic. So, the thief used his wind magic to leap over rooftops and cut through alleyways, trying to lose Dennis. But Dennis just powered through, copying the thief's path and blocking his escape. Even so, Dennis admitted that a little magic would come in handy. So, Vivia cast the only spell he knew, the palm. It basically created a trampoline in the shape of a hand, letting Dennis boost his speed even more, much to the terror of the child hanging on for dear life. Still, Vivia managed to keep casting palms, even if a bit haphazardly, keeping their wild chase going at full throttle. At one point, Dennis nearly caught up to the fugitive, but the guy was skilled with wind magic and managed to slip away before Dennis could grab him. To make matters worse, the guy even had the nerve to taunt the chef as he escaped. That was when Dennis took it personally and went right back to the chase, warning Vivia that he might fall off his shoulder at any moment, but if he did, he should at least land safely, even if it was from a pretty big height. Strangely enough, as they were flying through the market, they spotted Henrietta and Buckle. Speaking of them, the two girls got bumped into by the purse thief, and that ended up sealing his fate. After all, now Henrietta had a reason to go after him, and she put a stop to his escape with a well-placed punch. After that, the warrior saw Dennis arrive, and he recognized her for a job well done. That turned out to be the best reward she could have hoped for, since all she really wanted was to repay the kindness and warmth Dennis had shown her. Once all the chaos settled, the chef took the girls back to the restaurant to dish out some gossip about Aaliyah, or, well, he was not totally sure if she was dating someone, but it definitely looked that way. Changing the subject, Buckle said Henrietta was terrified she would get banned from the restaurant. But Dennis just smiled and reassured her there was no way he could ever kick out someone who enjoyed his food so much. Then, getting a bit more serious, he reminded everyone that even his patience had limits when it came to freeloaders. A moment later, Aaliyah finally returned, and the whole restaurant went quiet, everyone curious about where she had been. She crossed the room and handed Dennis a present. She said she had saved up to buy this jewel because it was the same color as his eyes. Dennis was over the moon, but when Henrietta almost blurted out that he had been following the girl around, Dennis playfully threatened to ban her from the restaurant for real this time. Aaliyah then asked her honorary dad to put on the bracelet. So, he did, and suddenly he felt like the happiest man in the world. Aaliyah's eyes welled up with tears, and she grabbed onto his pant leg in a gesture full of love and affection. Meanwhile, VGO, the leader of the Silver Wing, headed to a mansion to reunite with someone he had not seen in a long time. The next day, after the last lunch customers had left the restaurant, Dennis stretched, relieved that his shift was finally over. He asked Aaliyah to clean up the outside area for him. But just as she headed out, someone else walked into the place. The chef quickly called out that they were not serving any more meals for now. But the man, dressed in a butler's uniform, paid him no mind. Instead, he dropped to his knees in tears before Aaliyah, calling her my lady. Henrietta reached for her sword, just in case this was another creep with a thing for young girls, but the man quickly introduced himself as Stevens, butler to Aaliyah Workstat. At the sound of that surname, Vivia and Buckle's jaws dropped. Though Dennis and Henrietta had no idea what it meant, Buckle explained that House Workstat was the kingdom's greatest family of mags, the very top of the magical world. Still sobbing, Stevens sat down, unable to believe that his lady had been reduced to waiting tables in a place like this. Dennis was about ready to toss the guy out, but the kids were eager to hear what he had to say. Stevens began to explain he had been the butler at the Workstat estate, and he was here to fetch Aaliyah at the request of the Royal Court of Justice. The girl's late father, Lord Fommers, had a younger brother named Joseph, who had stolen her inheritance, claiming she was not really of the family's bloodline. That was how the poor girl ended up cast out. But now her father's will had come to light, and in it he had made clear that Aaliyah was his rightful heir, entitled to all the family's wealth and power. The government had accepted the will as valid. For Stevens, that meant it was finally time to expose Joseph's tyranny and restore the abandoned heir to her place. But after listening carefully to everything, Alia flat out refused all that fortune. She had no interest in any of it. She did not say why, but flashes of trauma clearly haunted her, and it was obvious she wanted nothing to do with her uncle. Stevens was desperate, insisting the girl should not have to work in a dirty little dive like this, which only irritated Dennis even more. Still, the cook could not help but admit to himself that he was just an ordinary guy in a small town, and Alia was the daughter of a wealthy family. He tried to understand whether she really wanted to give up everything that was rightfully hers, because in his mind it was not something she should dismiss so easily, especially considering her future. Alia finally said she would go as long as Dennis went with her. In the end, Dennis agreed to accompany her on this difficult journey. Vivia, perhaps getting a little too dressed up, decided to join the group for this adventure, which would take a few days, while Henrietta and Buckle stayed behind to watch the restaurant. Then the star of this story, Alia Workstat, appeared, stunning her friends in a gorgeous purple dress. She herself, though, was anything but happy. If she were being honest, she would have given anything to sort this out without having to return to the royal capital, the last place she wanted to be right now. But Dennis promised he would stay by her side the whole time, standing by the carriage that would carry them all. Stevens invited his lady and the rest of the rabble to climb aboard. Dennis wondered aloud if anything could be done about the butler's attitude. But Vivia just shrugged, admitting they really were just rabble. After several long hours, the group arrived in the royal capital. Vivia was wide-eyed, totally smitten by the beauty of the enormous city. While Dennis had to tell him to dial back the country boy act, like Alia, the ex-adventurer never expected to set foot in this place again. Vivia pointed out the Black's restaurant, famous for serving the best food in the capital. Dennis, lost in thought, barely reacted, and although he considered stopping by at some point, he ultimately decided against it, knowing they would only ask how he dared show his face around there. Soon after, they reached a government building where they were greeted by Sestic, the lawyer handling the case. First, he explained that they would need to examine Miss Alia's blood. As soon as the poor girl saw the needle, she shook with fear at the sight of that sharp thing that was about to pierce her skin and draw her blood. The mage managed to do it gently, but even though the whole process went smoothly, Alia nearly fainted. Sestic then invited her guardian to join him for the next step. So, Dennis left Alia in Vivia's arms and went along. Dennis wanted more details about the case. So the lawyer explained that the previous head of the family, Lord Fommers, had possessed a powerful hypnosis magic, a type of spell only certain bloodlines could wield or which could be granted to those with truly exceptional talent. Either way, it was rare, and Fommers was one of the few who had it. House Workstat carried that magical bloodline, and Lord Fommers had used his gifts to help countless people. But his brother Joseph, eager to claim that position for himself, had supposedly arranged for the couple's deaths and questioned Alia's legitimacy, which got her thrown out of the family. That alone could have been the end of her, but Lord Fommers had been clever enough to leave a will, and now that it had surfaced, the government had ordered a new investigation to confirm Alia's lineage. The investigation would use a magical device that Sestic now showed Dennis, a room with a giant transparent sphere at its center. The lawyer placed Alia's blood inside, then added Lord Fommers's blood, and the sphere began to fill with crystals. According to Sestic, if the pattern took on the shape of a flower, it meant the two people were first-degree relatives. Even using the blood of Fommers's wife, Lady Eliza, the result was the same, which proved that Alia was their daughter. In short, her chances of winning the case were very high. Soon after, before the court and the magical sphere, the judge announced the start of the trial to determine whether Alia's lineage was genuine. If so, she would be named the rightful heir to House Workstat, just as her father, Lord Fommers, had declared in his will. Joseph cut in, his voice dripping with irony, mocking the presence of a cowardly adventurer who had been expelled from Silver Wing. Dennis, unbothered, replied that he did not know Joseph and asked if by any chance he was a customer of VGO's. Setting that aside, Dennis condemned what Lord Fommers's brother did to Alia, promising to see that justice was served. Speaking of justice, the judge banged his gavel and demanded silence from Mr. Dennis Blacks. The moment she heard that surname, Vivia instantly recalled the Blacks restaurant. The judge then reminded everyone that the purpose of this hearing was to determine the legitimacy of the will, one that named Aliyah as the heir to the family fortune and headship, while Joseph was left with the knowledge and books from the house. Joseph's lawyer stood up and claimed that while Aliyah was indeed Lord Fomas's daughter, her mother was not Eliza, his wife, but rather his mistress, a woman of humble origins, lacking the lineage required to inherit leadership of the family that ruled over all Mags. On the other hand, Cestic promised to prove that Aliyah was Eliza's daughter using the magic sphere. The test he had performed not long ago guaranteed instant confirmation. Yet, Joseph remained oddly confident. With a smirk, he declared, "A mistress's child is a mistress's child. This is a waste of time." Now, it was up to Aliyah's lawyer to prove the truth. So, a doctor drew more blood from the girl for a fresh test. At that moment, the judge initiated a lottery to randomly choose who would activate the magic sphere, hoping to prevent any foul play. Once the drawing was over, the butler Stevens was chosen, having drawn the marked stick from the container. He approached the sphere, dramatically wiping the sweat from his brow with a hand towel. Following the judge's instructions, Stevens first added Miss Aliyah's blood, then Lord Fomas's. As soon as he did, the cluster of crystals blossomed into a flower, confirming the bond between father and daughter, much to Dennis's relief. Next, they added Aliyah's blood again, but this time with Lady Eliza's. At first, a flower formed, indicating a match, but then for some reason it distorted, showing that the two were not mother and daughter. Joseph could barely contain himself, he told them so, but Cestic insisted there must have been a malfunction and requested another test. The judge refused. Joseph, triumphant, doubled down. He loudly proclaimed that Aliyah was the result of his brother's weakness for his mistress and that she could not inherit the family's fortune. Hearing this, the poor girl trembled with humiliation and nerves. Given the circumstances, the judge declared that part of the will was invalid. But since it had been proven that the child was Lord Fomas's daughter, the rest must be reconsidered. As such, the wealth and power of House Workstat remained with Lord Joseph, while the knowledge and books went to Miss Aliyah. Joseph, unsurprisingly, was pleased with this outcome and could not resist pointing out that for all her flaws, the girl was still his brother's child. Looking around, Dennis spotted something odd in Stevens's hand. He stood and strode straight toward the butler, grabbing him by the collar. Dennis lifted the man off his feet. A blooded cloth dropped to the floor, revealing a cut on Stevens's hand. Dennis accused him of mixing his own blood into the test to sabotage the results. Stevens broke down and admitted he was promised his old position as head butler if he helped Joseph. Overcome by rage, the chef unleashed a power that left Stevens badly hurt. The judge ordered Dennis back to his seat immediately, but Dennis picked up 2 sticks from the floor, proving there was no marked stick in the container at all. The whole thing was rigged so Stevens would be chosen to run the test. With the truth exposed, he accused Joseph and his cronies of dragging a child through hell and then pulling her back just to make her suffer even more. At this point, the guards rushed Dennis, but the former adventurer was consumed by fury and swore to burn everyone who hurt Aliyah. But Vivia grabbed him from behind, begging him to think twice. If he lashed out now, he would be branded an enemy of the realm and likely thrown in prison. If that happened, Aliyah would have no one left to care for her. Realizing what was at stake, Dennis reined in his rage and looked straight at the girl. After all the chaos, Cestic told Dennis his conduct in court would be overlooked. As for everything else that had happened, the chef was filled with regret for having brought Aliyah to this viper's nest. But the lawyer pointed out that regardless, the knowledge and books of House Workstat were still in the girl's hands. So, it was worth taking a look. And so, Dennis, Aliyah, and Vivia headed to the family's book repository, which had been all but abandoned and was now little more than a storeroom full of cobwebs and rats. Even so, the lawyer hoped there was something of value inside, though the sorry state of the place suggested otherwise. Watching out for loose floorboards, Dennis warned Aliyah to mind her step. But it was not the rotting wood that caught her off guard. She accidentally stumbled into a magical storeroom and revealed a hidden chamber beneath the floor. Once inside, Vivia and Cestic were stunned by the books they found. The young mage spotted a chronicle of the First King, young Fry, while the lawyer recognized a research log belonging to the King of Strange Devices, a work so rare it should not even exist anymore. In short, this tiny secret library was home to world-shaking treasures, the complete works of Mongol, the Enuma series, and more. It was basically a repository for all of humanity's magical history. Seeing this, Sestic wondered if in the end Lord Fomas truly meant for Alia to inherit these things after all. The next day, the cook waited for Vivia to show up with Alia so they could leave the capital together, but the young mage had overslept, so he ended up running late. On his way, he passed a man in a cape and top hat who looked exactly like Dennis, but the energy the man gave off was completely different. Not far from there, Dennis was shouting for Vivia to hurry up. The man in the top hat, overhearing, commented on how beautiful the child's name was. The boy thanked him for the compliment and said goodbye just as a girl named Florenza called out to Heath and asked who that person was. Heath replied that it was a companion of his counterpart, the one he had mentioned before. The next day, the line to get into the restaurant nearly wrapped around the block. Inside, while enjoying their meal, Henrietta and Vivia were delighted to see so many mags and scholars, no doubt drawn in by the books Alia had inherited. Speaking of which, a wizard flipped open one of those books and realized it was part of the definitive collection sought after by the greatest sorcerers alive, while another was stunned to find the Necrofico. Seeing how overly excited these guys were, Dennis made it clear he did not mind them reading while they ate, so long as they left once they were finished. Suddenly, while the chef was busy juggling the flood of orders, one customer finally worked up the courage to approach him and say he might be able to cure his wife's illness by studying the complete works of Mongol lore. Hearing this, Dennis called out to Alia, telling her there was a man in trouble. The owner of the books granted him a special lending permit so he could try to save the love of his life. But when others saw the man walking out with the book, 3 more asked if they could take some home, too. Dennis quickly shut that down. This was a one-time exception. Book in hand, the desperate husband thanked them from the bottom of his heart and left. Moments later, more customers poured in, shouting their orders straight at the chef. Even with dozens of requests coming at him all at once, he remembered every single one. More impressively, he unleashed his magical abilities in full force, working the kitchen at lightning speed. Vivia asked if it was really okay for him to burn through all his spells at once, and he answered that there was simply no way to keep up otherwise. Watching his skill in action, Alia could only stare, mouth open in awe. The scene shifted to an old memory of a small abandoned child wandering the rainy streets while other children walked by, smiling under their umbrellas. This one had no protection except a ragged cloak and was forced to eat scraps of meat left on the ground. Soaked and shivering, the child sat there in silent misery as the rain dripped down their head. Then a woman passing by dropped her wallet. The child picked it up and returned it to her. Moved by the boy's kindness, the woman took him to the restaurant where she worked for something to eat. He did not even know how to hold a spoon properly, but the moment he tasted the food, it was as if his whole world had burst into color. The joy was so overwhelming, he could not stop eating, tears streaming down his face as he did. Back in the present, Dennis awoke after fainting. He tried to get up, his body burning hot, but the kids stopped him. He worried about the restaurant, but Buckle told him he could not be stressing about that in his condition. They had already closed for the day, clearly in no shape to work. Dennis apologized and lay back down. Alia put the ice bag back on his forehead. The chef asked why she looked so down, and Vivia explained that she had been worried sick, afraid he might have caught something serious, or even that he would not wake up at all. Dennis gave a faint chuckle and assured her it was nothing major, then drifted back to sleep. Vivia added that according to the doctor, it was probably just a cold, though the young mage suspected he had simply overworked himself. Henrietta agreed he had not taken a single day off since returning from the capital. Vivia planned to give him some medicine when he woke, but until then, he needed rest. With that, all the children left, except for Alia, who insisted on staying by the side of the man who by now was practically a father to her. Meanwhile, the others, though aware of why the chef had collapsed, still worried it might be something worse. So, they tried to think of a way to help. Buckle suggested making a nourishing rice porridge, and everyone liked the idea. After all, proper food was essential for good health. Henrietta, the most enthusiastic of them all, suited up in full armor so she would not burn herself at the stove. Thinking about the ingredients, she grabbed a huge cut of meat and could only picture it perfectly grilled. Vivia, on the other hand, wondered at what point this airhead had forgotten they were making porridge. Unbothered, Henrietta grabbed a massive cleaver to chop the meat, looking for a moment like she might split the entire restaurant in two, so Vivia rushed in to stop her from destroying the chef's workplace. Just then, Buckle came in with a bucket of ice for Alia and stumbled upon the chaos between the kids. In the middle of it all, Cestic heard the commotion from outside and burst into the restaurant to see what was going on. In Dennis's room, Alia accidentally dropped the ice bag from his head. She checked his temperature, it was still hot. Somehow, the poor girl blamed herself for his exhaustion. After all, he had poured out every ounce of his strength in that courtroom to save her. Because of Dennis, she had been given a second chance at life, and for that, she was grateful enough to put the ice bag back on his head with a smile. Back in the past, a man shouted that Dennis would not get away with his mischief this time. Hanging from a window like a monkey and dressed as a cook, the boy protested that he had only been helping in the kitchen, then jumped down and bolted. The woman who had taken him in came over to ask what happened, and the assistant explained that the brat had been pulling pranks again. This time, he had messed with the julienne cabbage the cook had prepared, chopping it into even tinier pieces. The man muttered that the kid must have forgotten how much he owed the head chef for taking him in. The woman admitted Dennis was not the type to take scoldings well, and the man sighed that the boy would just stay spoiled and never listen to anyone, but she believed that one day Dennis would understand because that was simply the way he was. Out of the corner of his eye, the boy overheard the conversation, and it seemed to hit him hard. One day, Dennis came running in, grinning from ear to ear after finally managing to make fried rice with each grain perfectly separate. He burst straight into the restaurant, bowl in hand. One of the waiters thought about scolding the boy, and after all, this place was far too upscale for that kind of commotion, but in the end, he decided to just let fate take the wheel. Carefree, Dennis glanced around, wondering what to do with his prized creation. That's when a woman nearby commented on how good it smelled. A customer, intrigued, remarked on how impressive it was that Black's restaurant had such a young and talented cook. Thrilled, Dennis offered her a taste. But the moment she tried it, she nearly spat it all out right there. Within seconds, several staff members rushed over to help until the head chef herself appeared to see what on earth was going on. She quickly learned that Dennis had given the customer something questionable. Taking the fried rice from the boy, she cast a quick spell on the dish, then served the very same portion back to the woman. The lady, still suspicious, hesitantly took another bite, and this time her eyes lit up in delight. The chef explained that her apprentice had simply forgotten to add a crucial ingredient. Later, Dennis approached her like a guilty puppy, apologizing for using a strange ability on the food. The woman seized the moment to drive home the importance of using the right kind of magic. And Dennis began to cry, convinced he had made something wonderful when in fact he had not. She comforted him, telling him he needed to study more, but also to listen to people. After promising he would, Dennis asked how she had managed to save the dish. She told him it was child's play for her, after all, she was known as the legendary fried rice master. And she added, he could be one too someday. That sent the boy's spirit soaring. Back in the present, Vivia asked why Cestic had shown up. The lawyer admitted he was a magic fanatic and had come to read one of the volumes Alia had inherited. But right now, Dennis looked unwell, helping him was more important than catching up on his reading. So, the man asked what they planned to cook for the chef, and Henrietta, eyes sparkling, replied, rice porridge. Hearing that, Cestic declared it was time to cook the rice. To the kid's amazement, like some wise hermit from the mountains, he explained that once you had perfectly cooked rice, then the true making of rice porridge began. The real discussion, he said, should be about which magic to use to prepare the finest rice possible. According to him, the king of strange devices, Workstat, had combined skills in a multifunctional way and thus created the magic in question. Before going into law, Cestic had been a passionate researcher, so he knew these things firsthand. Buckle, being a mage herself, joined in, pointing out that sorcery fundamentals dictated one should use flame magic. but the problem was that the heat's intensity changed depending on the user's imagination and skill. Vivia agreed, adding that if the fire was not consistent, the rice could end up dry or mushy. So Sestic proposed using the spectral fire produced by Ghost Flame. Its heat strength could be controlled by the amount of mana used, allowing for more precise cooking. Henrietta, completely lost in all this magical talk, just stared blankly. Vivia warned that Ghost Flame had one drawback: it would not produce the crispy golden crust at the bottom of the pot. Not wanting to lose that crunchy goodness, Buckle suggested combining flame magic with Ghost Flame. Sestic agreed, but Vivia strongly objected, saying that the two together would make the fire's consistency unstable all over again. Sweating, Sestic admitted they had reached a dead end. Still, Vivia was not ready to give up. He suggested using a pot imbued by alchemists with high-quality magical catalysts to force the temperature to remain constant. Buckle nearly cried, realizing this might be their only choice. In the end, after all that back and forth, Sestic had the answer. They would use both Ghost Flame and regular flame magic and counter the unstable heat with a catalyst-infused pot to keep it steady. That way, they would cook the most delicious rice the world had ever seen. With that decided, the next question arose: how to use magic to turn that rice into perfect porridge. Henrietta, worn out by the endless debate, just wanted it all to be over. Luckily, Vivia and Buckle called for a break. Their heads were fried from thinking so much. Just then, the merchant Pulvo walked into the restaurant. Having heard the chef was ill, he brought a catalogue featuring a magical rice box, a device capable of making outstanding rice with the crispy crust, and he was offering it at half price. As if that were not enough, this model had a special porridge mode. Henrietta asked if it would work without Ghost Flame or regular flames, and the merchant just stared at her. Why on earth would anyone cook the rice first and then make porridge? You just boil water, throw in the raw rice, and voila, porridge. Hearing that, the three so-called mags wished they could disappear into the floor. Either way, they scrapped all the complicated plans and decided to just buy the magic box. Following the manual's instructions, all they had to do was set it and let it cook the porridge for them. Aaliyah came in to say Dennis's fever had gone down, which made Henrietta happy. The chef would probably be able to eat the porridge after all. Knowing what his friends were making for him, Aaliyah suggested adding eggs to the recipe to make it even more nutritious. Her friends praised the little girl's cooking skills. After all, she had learned a lot from the head chef. According to Aaliyah, you should whisk an egg as if you were slicing it. Buckle mentioned that the only omelette she could eat was the sweet kind, while Vivia said it was just the opposite. In her opinion, a proper omelette needed to have the taste of broth. Seeing Henrietta looking lost again, the two asked if there was anything she simply could not eat. After a brief pause to think, the blonde confidently declared that she did not like eating leather shoes. While Buckle nearly teared up in sadness, Vivia asked if she was actually saying she eats shoes. Henrietta explained that yes, her family used to eat them. Her father claimed that leather shoes were made from animal skin. Hearing that, Buckle felt sorry for her friend, while Vivia decided it was best to drop the subject later on. Dennis woke up to find Aaliyah walking into the room with a bowl of egg porridge in hand. The moment he tasted it, the cook felt the same warmth he had experienced back when he was taken in by that head chef at Black's restaurant. When he complimented the flavor and asked if she had made it, Aaliyah blushed, smiled, and explained that she had stirred the eggs exactly the way the chef had taught her, as if slicing them. Then she added that the porridge itself had actually been made by the octopus, Pulvo, instantly shattering the tender moment and sending the cook into a quiet panic. The next day, Henrietta was cheerfully skipping through the market streets, so much so that an old lady could not help but remark, "The young miss looks quite happy today." A little further ahead, the girl ran into Vivia and proudly showed him the mountain of luggage she was carrying. According to her, she was so excited about today's celebration that she decided to come fully prepared. One of the merchants stopped them and joked that it was unusual to see the two of them out at lunchtime instead of at Dennis's restaurant. They explained that the adventurer's restaurant would be closed for a while because of a special day. Meanwhile, back at the establishment, Dennis found Buckle and Aaliyah with their bags packed. Noticing Aaliyah's outfit, he pointed out that she did not really need to wear that for the trip, but she seemed unwilling to change. Henrietta and Vivia soon arrived, and Dennis announced that it was time to leave. But before setting off, Henrietta wanted to make sure everyone had brought towels. They all nodded. Next, she asked about soap, and everyone showed theirs, then buckets. And finally, before departure, it was time for everyone to take a bath. So, the group gathered to wash up. Vivier could not hide his amazement at the chef's chiseled physique. Grinning ear to ear, Dennis declared that this is what a man should look like. On the other hand, he questioned why the kid was so scrawny, to which Vivier replied that it was fine, he was a mage after all. Besides, he simply could not understand how the chef had built so much muscle. Dennis revealed that the secret was doing 2,000 push-ups every single day, which led Vivier Strange to conclude that this man definitely was not human. Setting that aside, Dennis asked why the boy was not going towel-free like any normal person would in a public bath. Clearly embarrassed, Vivier tried to cover himself, but the chef was not about to let him off easy and even attempted to yank the towel away. Meanwhile, the girls were enjoying a peaceful, friendly atmosphere, nothing but soap and laughter. At one point, Buckle wondered aloud when Henrietta had developed such a striking figure, though the warrior, as usual, insisted she was not any different from other women. Aaliyah, on the other hand, felt a little insecure, admitting she still did not feel like a real woman yet. Later that day, Dennis prepared a big plate of snacks for the group and poured drinks. Now the main event of the evening could begin. The chef placed Henrietta in charge of the opening speech. Completely caught off guard, the poor girl panicked. But Dennis argued that she was the only Henrietta at the table. And so, trembling, she began by thanking him for gathering everyone there despite his tiring routine and endless responsibilities. Dennis chuckled, saying she sounded like a robot, which only made her more emotional. She went on to admit that she owed the chef a great debt, but was happy to finally have found a job with the Knight's Order where she could dedicate herself to helping people. Vivier quipped that the scoundrel could finally start paying back what she owed the chef. Then the mage himself announced that he had found another group of adventurers. They were not as famous as his old companions, but it was an important step for him on his path to becoming a great wizard. Henrietta teased that he could now pay off his debt to the restaurant as well. But Vivier protested he refused to be compared to a freeloader since he always paid for his meals, unlike her. To wrap things up, Buckle stood and revealed that she had decided to return home to her parents and become a teacher at the Royal Capital's magic school, having been invited even before graduation. With everyone sharing their life updates, Dennis raised a toast to celebrate the group's growth. It was time to eat, drink, and dream of the future while savoring the present. Watching Aaliyah unintentionally intimidate Buckle by insisting that nearly raw meat was cooked enough, Vivier commented to Dennis that the two seemed to have become great friends. Then he sighed, lamenting that everyone seemed to be moving on and that things were bound to get lonelier from now on. His words made the others uneasy as well. Henrietta even considered postponing her new job, an idea Buckle thought was reasonable. But Dennis reminded them that now at last they had the chance to do what they had always wanted and that they should not throw it away if it mattered that much. Vivier and Buckle agreed, while Henrietta grew so motivated that she declared she would leave town the very next morning. Aaliyah pointed out she had not even started the job yet, and everyone burst into laughter when the warrior realized how nonsensical her idea was. As the night went on, Dennis whipped up another feast using his level 99 magic, leaving everyone in awe. Soon, a generous portion of fried rice was served to each of them. Suddenly Pulvo appeared, helping himself to a plate. Drawn by the irresistible aroma, the merchant explained that he could not stay away. Dennis recognized him as that shady vendor who sold all sorts of oddities, but annoyed him by forgetting his name. When Aaliyah reminded him it was Pulvo, the man celebrated that at least someone remembered and even took the chance to invite the girl to work at his shop again. Dennis smacked him on the head, warning him not to pester his little mascot like that. Still, since it was thanks to Pulvo that Dennis had tasted that egg porridge, he decided not to beat him up. In fact, he was even considering adding a new dish to the menu using that recipe and the magical pot. Finally, he asked what exactly that sly merchant was doing there. Pulvo begged not to be called sly in front of Aaliyah and explained that he had heard Dennis was holding a barbecue, so he came to offer a banquet only he could provide, a piece of level 5 Hagen meat. Grinning at the merchant's generosity, Dennis pulled out 2 razor-sharp kitchen knives and accepted the challenge. Moments later, the slab of meat was tossed high into the air, and the chef sliced it into dozens of perfectly measured pieces. Once that was done, the meat hit the fire and was served to the boys, who somehow managed to feel even more satisfied, despite having already enjoyed a whole series of dishes prepared by the city's renowned chef. Feeling down, Pulvo muttered under his breath that his idea had been to offer it only to Aaliyah. By the way, the girl slipped a piece of meat into Dennis's mouth, and the merchant admitted he was jealous. Seeing that, she did him the same favor, and the big guy nearly fainted from sheer joy. Sometime later, while Pulvo was asleep, dreaming of poor Aaliyah, Vivia finally asked Dennis the question he had been holding back for so long. In court, they had called him Dennis Blacks. So, the mage wanted to know if the chef was related to anyone from the Blacks restaurant. The man explained that the family name Blacks actually belonged to the head cook, his foster mother, whose name he had once carried, but he did not want to use it anymore. Not after storming out following a nasty fight back when he was close to level 90. Looking back, Dennis admitted he had been full of himself, and his mother had only tried to keep him grounded. Vivia found it almost unbelievable that even Dennis had gone through a cocky phase, though he could understand why. After all, Dennis had reached level 99 so young, just one step away from the limit. At the time, Dennis had been sure he would soon hit level 100, which was why he left the Blacks restaurant to work in different kitchens, all so he could brag about it to his foster mother. Then one day, he joined Silver Wing, the place he stayed the longest. And despite everything, he had to admit he had received a lot of help from those people. But the plain truth was that Dennis never did reach level 100. Meanwhile, in town, 2 of the restaurant's most loyal customers were on their way to the adventurer's restaurant, debating which dish to order today, but to their surprise, they were greeted by a sign: the place was closed for business reasons. At that moment, a pair of men walked past them. One of them shoved the girl in front. Her friend turned to demand an explanation, but the guy simply flashed a knife and walked off with swagger. Not about to let that slide, the sorceress summoned the Guardian of Dawn and fired a magic arrow straight into the thug's backside. As he stumbled to his feet, her partner followed up with the Pit of Ramen spell, striking his accomplice. Suddenly, flames erupted from the alley where the men had come from, right beside the restaurant. By then, Dennis and the kids were on their way back. More than satisfied from the feast, Dennis himself had drunk so much that a young mage, barely a tenth of his weight, had to help carry him along. From a distance, they saw the fire raging near the restaurant, and Dennis bolted ahead, heart pounding, unable to believe what might have happened to his beloved place. When he arrived, the worst lay before his eyes. The adventurer's restaurant was engulfed in flames, collapsing piece by piece. Desperate, the chef looked around for a way to fight the fire. While the 2 young mags pinned down the culprits and identified them as the ones responsible, Vivia recognized them as members of the Nightmist Troop. One of them shouted that Dennis and his crew had this coming for acting so high and mighty. The other added that Nightmist was not alone. Silver Wing and the Workstat house were standing with them, all ready to crush the restaurant's chef. Later, Dennis stood in silence, head lowered, staring at the ashes of the place he loved. Memories of every joyful moment he had lived there came rushing back, each one bittersweet as the cruel truth sank in. It was all gone. Even the rare books Aaliyah had inherited from her family were reduced to dust. Henrietta broke down in tears at such malice, while Vivia blamed himself for the tragedy. If Dennis had not saved him, the Nightmist Troop would not have come after him. Buckle felt guilty too, certain that she was the reason their captain had set his sights on the chef. But Dennis told them they bore no blame at all. Honestly, he had not expected Silver Wing to be part of this. He believed Joseph Workstat must have sought out VGO to form the alliance, with Nightmist simply hired to do the dirty work like setting the fire. Given everything, Dennis took full responsibility, admitting that maybe he had been arrogant, thinking he could just brush off enemies this dangerous. Vivia tried to lift his spirits, insisting that together they could take these people down, since Dennis had always faced problems head-on. But Dennis seemed weary of more battles. He told them he would rather open a small restaurant in another town. After all, no one had been hurt, so in the end, he did not see it as a catastrophe. Henrietta could not believe he was backing down like this and urged them to go after the criminals. The chef, baffled, wondered how these kids could possibly think he was Superman, especially now after losing everything. Truthfully, he once thought he was strong enough to tank a fight like this. But look where that had led. The kingdom's highest noble had teamed up with the most powerful adventurers, and they had muscle to spare. In short, there was no way to take these people on. With a forced smile, Dennis ended the conversation, leaving the kids in shock. Still unwilling to give up, Vivia pressed him. Why was the chef acting so unlike himself? The Dennis he knew would take on the whole kingdom if it meant protecting Aaliyah. Calmly, the man replied that he had simply cooled his head. Then he vanished into the night with Aaliyah, leaving Vivia shouting after him, restrained by his friends. As he climbed to the second floor, Dennis took comfort in the fact that at least the safe had survived the fire. Still holding the bag of money inside, Aaliyah asked if his foster father was really going to accept this, and knowing exactly what she meant, he answered that it was the best thing to do. Every action carries a consequence, and if he chose to fight back, an even harsher reaction would follow, one that could very well lead to someone's death. With that said, Dennis repeated that all he wanted now was to leave. Outside the restaurant, Vivia, Henrietta, and Buckle stood before the charred remains of their favorite place, unable to accept its end. That's when a few suspicious-looking men began to approach the trio. Aaliyah then asked if she could follow Dennis on his new journey. He seemed surprised by the question. At this point, the answer was obvious. He reminded her that Joseph had come after him only because he tried to interfere with his plans in court, which meant the chef owed her an apology for her books being burned. But Aaliyah assured him it was fine. All she ever wanted was to please the customers. What she could not stand was seeing the chef sad. Dennis explained that sometimes sadness was unavoidable. Then, looking out, he remarked that this city truly was a good place. Aaliyah smiled in agreement and added that she liked it better than the royal capital. The two touched fists in a gesture of affection and camaraderie. Dennis promised that one day when things had settled down, they would come back.